It seems that only a far, far away conflict involving Israel can be so prominently addressed at the Oscars in Los Angeles last Sunday, including in an acceptance speech for The Zone of Interest. A film follows the domestic life of a Nazi commandant whose house is just outside the Auschwitz concentration camp. Its director, Jonathan Glazer, read from prepared notes after the film won for Best International Feature, providing appreciation to colleagues before turning to the Israel-Hamas war. All our choices, he said, were made to reflect and confront us in the present, not to say, look what they did then, rather, look what we do now. Our film shows where dehumanization leads at its worst. It shaped all of our past and present. Glazer, who is Jewish, also said that he rejected Jewishness and the Holocaust being hijacked by an occupation which has led to conflict for so many innocent people. Many of us were taken aback by Glazer's flaming self-loathing, especially him baselessly comparing the dehumanization of the Holocaust to the Israel-Hamas war. You made a Holocaust movie and won an Oscar, and you are Jewish. Good for you, wrote David Schechter, a Holocaust survivor and president of the Miami-based Holocaust Survivors Foundation USA. But it is disgraceful for you to presume to speak for the 6 million Jews, including 1.5 million children, who were murdered solely because of their Jewish identity. The occupation of which you speak has nothing to do with the Holocaust, added Schechter. The Jewish people's existence and right to live in the land of Israel predates the Holocaust by hundreds of years. Yet, the notion of self-hating Jews is not a new phenomenon. Tiberius Julius Alexander was a Jewish governor and general in the Roman Empire who ordered 5,000 Roman troops to destroy the Jewish community in Jerusalem. The outcome? The destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE, which led to Jewish exile and the Jewish diaspora, which led to socio-economic and lethal anti-Semitism against Jews across the world, which led to pogroms, which led to modern Zionism, which led to the return to our indigenous homeland, which led to the creation of the State of Israel, which led to various Arab countries and factions using the Palestinians as a pawn to advance their own geopolitical agendas against Israel, which led to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which brings us to where we are today. 5 months after the worst attack against Jews since the Holocaust, when Palestinian terrorists infiltrated Israel, massacred more than 1,000 Jews, and took hostage well over 200 civilians on October 7th. How is that for connecting the dots? Throughout Jewish history, and especially in modern Jewish history, Jew-on-Jew antagonism has reared its ugly head, and there are many reasons for it, such as internalized anti-Semitism, desire for assimilation, perceived white privilege, negative feelings regarding ethnocentrism, and lack of knowledge and education. Let's take a look at each one. Number 1. Internalized anti-Semitism. Internalized anti-Semitism is the concept that people can ingest and even accept stereotypes, discrimination, prejudices, and traumas experienced by a particular group of people, their ethnicity, or their religion. Consider when hear about a Jewish person who commits some heinous crime, such as Bernie Madoff or Jeffrey Epstein. Rationally, there is no reason why the Jewishness of these criminals should make us feel ashamed by their actions, though I'll bet that many of us Jews felt that shame. And the main reason Jews feel it is because of the negative stereotypes that abound Jews, Judaism, and Jewish history. Jews are triggered by the nasty beliefs that others hold about us, which have become so entrenched in the soil of civilization that many Jews have absorbed some of these beliefs ourselves. Hence why internalized oppression is likely to consist of self-hatred, self-concealment, fear of violence, and feelings of inferiority, resignation, isolation, powerlessness, and gratefulness for being allowed to survive. Self-disgust, a construct which may be internalized from centuries of being treated as contagion and without the right of existence, is another way in which internalized anti-Semitism can manifest subtly. To this end, some Jews may perceive themselves as flawed, and if they have tried their best to shed their Jewishness, reminders of it may stir up disdain, anxiety, and fear. Of course, internalized anti-Semitism manifests along a continuum, with some aspects hidden to the eye, others visible if being looked for, and still other aspects displayed in rather appalling fashion. Some Jews have gotten rid of what are perceived as traditional Jewish features, such as a strong nose, dark curly hair, or expressiveness of speech. Though internalized anti-Semitism can lead to Jewish self-hatred, the two phenomenon are different. Whereas internalized anti-Semitism is common in one form or another, actual self-hatred is probably rare. Most Jews who have seriously internalized anti-Semitism seem to be ambivalent about their Jewishness, rather than truly self-hating. Number 2. Desire for assimilation. A logical response to looking at anti-Semitism is to wonder how Jews have coped, survived, and even thrived in the face of repeated persecution, forced conversions, and centuries of general oppression. Many Jews, for example, responded to anti-Semitism in the 20th century by attempting to assimilate. They changed their names, altered their noses, modulated their tones, married non-Jews, did not teach their children the Jewish languages which they brought with them from the Old World, downplayed the communication styles which were perceived to be too loud and expressive, and at times incorporated Christian traditions into religious services to minimize their Jewishness. Many other Jews shared the anti-oppression emphasis of the political left and entered into leftist organizations. But here, too, they assimilate. These Jews believed they would be better off and less likely to be persecuted as Jews if they could show their non-Jewish neighbors that they were really just like them, that they really could behave in ways that were inoffensive, not different from the behavioral patterns of their non-Jewish neighbors, and that they really would not insist on specifically Jewish concerns within the left. Another and contradictory tactic was to immerse oneself in traditional Jewish religious life, or orthodoxy. While this was not just a response to anti-Semitism did influence the desire to have as little as possible to do with the painful world and ideas of the Goyim, non-Jews. Orthodox Jews were, and are, usually readily identifiable as Jews by the clothing they wear. They often live in tight-knit communities of other Orthodox Jews and may view non-Jews or even non-Orthodox Jews as debased and deeply untrustworthy. The Zionist approach also attracted a number of Jews, as resolution to the centuries-old yearning for the indigenous land from which Jews had been exiled. Underlying this desire, particularly in the post-World War II era, was the notion that creating and maintaining a viable Jewish state was the only real path to safety in a world which had mostly turned a blind eye to the repeated enactment of anti-Semitism. Number 3. Perceived white privilege. Many people, both Jewish and not, who live in liberal democracies, proclaim that anti-Semitism has been eradicated in these places, and that Jews are now widely perceived to be white people, with the privileges that so-called white people enjoy. The irony is that if Jews are white, with the assumption of power and privilege that white people hold, little to no room is left to examine either historical anti-Semitism or the ways in which anti-Semitism still plays out. This cloak of whiteness prevents the exploration of Jews as 11 ethnic minorities with a unique history of oppression. At the same time, whiteness precludes Jews' inclusion within a multicultural context, where their equally unique and ongoing contributions to the world might be examined. Without this examination, there is a shroud of ignorance and invisibility around anti-Semitism, and if non-Jews do not understand or recognize this phenomenon, not only is the possibility of it reoccurring great, but Jewish anxiety and vulnerability will be perpetuated. Not to mention, Jews as a white people is intellectually dishonest. Currently, this claim ignores the some 60% of Jews in Israel who have Middle Eastern and North African descent, as well as all the Jews who have emigrated from the Middle East and North Africa to other countries not named Israel. Number 4. Negative feelings regarding ethnocentrism. There are Jews who subscribe to Jewish exceptionalism, or using biblical language, being the chosen people. In the field of anthropology, this concept is known as ethnocentrism. Within social justice movements, The phrase internalized superiority may at times be used to designate one way in which oppression impacts identity formation, in this case, thousands of years of persecution on Jewish identity. But if you, like me, are among the Jews who were educated with the worldview that all humans are created equal, you might be appalled by the concept of Jewish exceptionalism. In general, many people who come into contact with concepts that contradict their worldviews have perverse reactions to such contradictions, since they can make you feel insecure. Is it possible that I've been wrong all this time? Vulnerable? If what I've been taught is untrue, who am I and what do I stand for? And betrayed? Could it be that my teachers deceived me or led me down the wrong path? These powerful and painful feelings of insecurity, vulnerability, and betrayal have a tendency to make people repel contradictory worldviews, because it's far easier to repel them than it is to sit with these feelings and rework your worldviews. This is especially the case when a Jew's non-Jewish worldviews are a significantly greater part of their personal identity and sense of self-worth than is their Jewishness. And lastly, number 5, lack of knowledge and education. Many Jews believe the Holocaust happened in a vacuum, or that Jews have over-exaggerated their victimhood throughout history, including but not limited to Jews who have never really experienced anti-Semitism themselves. This self-centered view produces a thought process like, if I or those close to me have never directly experienced anti-Semitism, it must not be all that bad. Yet it is this sort of mindset that's ignorantly absent of Jewish history, which in turn could be a dangerous absence of knowledge and education, or effective education. Many of these Jews do not know that Islamic cultures, while not as virulent in their expression of anti-Semitism as Christian ones, still propose that Jews were second-class citizens who were taxed disproportionately and lived lives of precarious appeasement to whomever was in power. While these two religions ignited the initial flames of anti-Semitism and spread it throughout their growing empires, ruling classes have fueled the fire when it has been expedient for them. It could be argued that anti-Semitism began to have a life of its own during medieval Europe, capable of being spontaneously awakened simultaneous to social and economic unrest, a deeply and intricately embedded construct in the usually non-Jewish psyche, mostly unconscious as a construct having to do with money, religion, and taboo is likely to be. There are also history's less obvious forms of anti-Semitism, which includes the ideas that Jews control the media, if not the world, that they have more power than others, often with a sinister association, that they are without moral regard, that they are materialistic and difficult, that they cannot be trusted, that they are responsible for 9/11, and that Zionism equals racism, a charge justifying broad brushstrokes of anti-Jewish sentiment. A narrow focus on the human rights abuses of Israel, while excluding the equally, if not more, egregious human rights abuses of its neighbors, is also thought to be anti-Semitic and indicative of a double standard that may point the way to anti-Semitism in an era when oppression or hatred of any sort is more likely to be masked than in previous eras. Some heavily liberal-minded Jews often comfort themselves by believing that they are personally far removed from the hatreds and discrimination of the past. We are aware of continued systemic racism and sexism, and despite tremendous progress, know how much work there is still to do. On the other hand, these heavily liberal-minded Jews may not realize how they are responsible for the perpetuation of common prejudices, as we all are, including Jewish liberals who are blind to their own anti-Semitism and their role in endangering Jews everywhere. This is not a new problem on the left. Phyllis Chesler, author of the 2003 book, The New Anti-Semitism, has been warning about anti-Semitism on the left and among feminists. For those professing to fight racism, prejudices, and bigotry, anti-Semitism is the only acceptable form of racism, according to Chesler. This is belligerently revealed when the topic of Israel is raised among heavily liberal-minded folks, and especially when Israel dares to defend itself with military force. This observation is not meant to shut down dialogue and debate about Israel. Rather, it is a call to be mindful of how internalized anti-Semitism plays a significant role in how we react to Israel's actions, how we judge the Jewish state, and how we analyze the conflict between Israel, the Palestinians, and Arab states who use the Palestinians as a pawn to further their own geopolitical interests. Further problematic is that we have been fed a steady diet of falsehoods about the creation of Israel. For instance, that the Jewish state was simply created because of the Holocaust. It was not. That most or all Israelis are white colonizers. Most of them are not white, and most of them are not colonizers according to the very definitions of these terms. And that Israelis stole land from the Palestinians. They did not. What's more, many liberals have no deep knowledge of history, instead hiding behind an anti-Zionism agenda that has intellectualized and rationalized anti-Semitism by dressing up centuries-old Jew hate in modern-day academia. Perhaps because we hoped anti-Semitism would end after the unthinkable tragedies of the Holocaust, and some assumed it did. One only has to look at the demonstrations and behaviors on the streets of London, Paris, Washington, D.C., New York City, and Berlin, and the defamation on social media, as well as the hate from the mouths of elected officials, to notice that this assumption is so evidently wrong. Anti-Semitism encourages unhinged rage against Israel and Israelis, a level of rage expressed against no other country and no other people. It permits the viewing of Israel as uniquely racist, oppressive, and evil, instead of being seen as ordinary or all too human. Even what people call soft or positive anti-Semitism encourages double standards and unfairly heightened expectations for Israel, which faces extraordinary challenges from enemies sadly lacking respect, dignity, and morality. Anti-Semitism also makes it easy for people to believe numerous blood libels about Israel, such as the charge that it is committing genocide or engaging in ethnic cleansing. This is no different than when people actually believed that Jews murdered God in the form of Jesus, drank the blood of Christian children, and caused the bubonic plague. Anti-Zionist movements have made this further acceptable by attempting to intellectually separate Jews outside of Israel from those within Israel, in effect saying it is okay to hate these Jews over here or Jews who support them, Zionists. At a minimum, to repeat such modern blood libels as gospel truth is to recklessly support those calling for the genocide of the Jews, for who is more worthy of killing than people who are guilty of committing genocide? Empathizing with civilians in Gaza, promoting the creation of a Palestinian state, criticizing Israel's settlement policy, its mistakes in war and peace, and its flaws as a society is not anti-Semitic. But if you do the foregoing without learning about the history and context of Israel's actions and those of its enemies, if you only question the right of the Jewish people to self-determination or endlessly seek to delegitimize the creation of the modern state of Israel, if you support an economic, academic, or other boycott of Israel, but not of other countries you believe are violating human rights, if you seek moral equivalence between Israel and Hamas, a terrorist group whose stated purpose is the destruction of Israel and all Jews, if you presume Israel guilty of war crimes before investigations are made, if you believe Israel is uniquely evil or the root of all problems in the Middle East, if you believe in Israel's self-defense theoretically but not in actuality, if you view this current war in Gaza as different from all other wars and the civilian casualties as different from other civilian casualties in war, you must ask yourself why. I would tell you there's a term for this. It's called being a self-hating Jew.